welcome to Legally Speaking with me, Tarun Nangia. The Government of India, the Ministry of Finance is looking at a proposal that will help millions of traders and manufacturers all across the country. There is a proposal to decriminalize offenses. For example, arrests will not, if this proposal passes muster, arrests will not be made up to 20 crores of offense. Currently, arrests can be made anywhere after an offense crosses the threshold limit of rupees 5 crore. So this is about raising the threshold of cognizable and non-bailable offenses from 5 crore to 20 crore. There are many other also changes that are being brought in section 138 also, section 83 also, but I will go across to my panel for getting more information on this. May I welcome S. Ravi, who is founder of Ravi Rajan and Company. Good to see you again. I have with me Advocate Rohan Shah, a well-known name in the industry on the GST practice side also. Good to see you again, Mr. Shah. I have with me Rakesh Nangia, who is chairman of Nangia Anderson Private Limited. Good to see you, Mr. Nangia. And at the outset, may I request Mr. S. Ravi that in about the first 3 minutes, if he could lay the ground of the changes that we are going to see in the coming days, if it is deliberated well in the GST Council meeting, which is going to be held anytime in middle November. We've got to know it's between 12 and 15, but let us say, over to you, Mr. Ravi.
First of all, these changes would be welcomed by everybody. Section 138, for example, 138, 83, and 132. These three sections actually of the GST Act requires major changes. And people feel very threatened because they do not have especially small businesses, they do not have the knowledge or they do not get the technical advice from people and they cannot afford it. So they fear arrest, they have a fear of non-compliance, which could be because of a technical error or an interpretation error. So these three sections, it's a very laudable step taken by the Finance Ministry and Minister herself, that these sections are revisited in the forthcoming GST Council. Coming to the threshold, 5 to 20 crores is a very good threshold to start with, because I think the small businesses are impacted in that range. And there have been issues around them. Second, about the attachment of the bank, that's another issue that has been worrying most of the people, because suddenly their bank account is attached and they are unable to function. And then the business spins into something negative and they are never able to recoup from there. So that is another fear. Most of the small and medium sector enterprises, small traders face this. And then, of course, the last but not the least, the compounding. The compounding, yes, straight away prosecution is a very, very difficult thing for anybody. Minor offenses, issues which are technical in nature, where there is no purpose of evasion, I think their compounding should be allowed, and that is because it's very important. A mistake does not mean it's a willful mistake. It can be because of multiple issues. So I think it's a very welcome step. As far as I am concerned, it's a very good step. And we are learning over this last 3, 4, 5 years. We have learned what are the mistakes, and that's why we should graduate from here. That's what I feel.
Thanks for the opening comment. I'll go to Mr. Rakesh Nangia, Chairman with Nangia Anderson Limited. Mr. Nangia, so Section 132, Section 138, and Section 83, compounding of offences, criminalization of GST, and arrest threshold. All these three big changes are on the anvil, a big relief for many businessmen. How do you look at this proposal, and do you see that this will finally be approved? Do you see any roadblocks and any suggestions that you might want to give on this issue?
So at the foremost, Tarun, what I'd like to tell you is this. The government has made the intention very clear to decriminalize for minor offences overboard. Every act in the country, government made a statement sometime a year back. And this process has started for all the laws. A month back, they decriminalized substantially the Income Tax Act. And now we are moving towards the GST. And this is the need of the hour. This is the need of the time today, because every small offense cannot go through the prosecution and issuing a warrant and arrest is concerned. But what happens when there's a lot of discretion comes into play of it? But let me tell you very historically, I would like to take you a minute for the historical thing. There was the same criminalization process even in the service tax regime, but there were layers of check. So first, there was one of the thing was which was the layer was that there should have been a show cause notice should have been issued, a proceeding should have been pending, show cause notice have been issued, and show cause notice should have been adjudicated against you. Then only when you cross the threshold, a power of arrest was there. So once the GST came in 2017 till January of 2021, government moved and removed the third layer. They said there should be a proceedings pending, and the show cause notice should be adjudicated, a reasonable level of that. But show cause notice should have been issued. So then if the notice had been issued, the warrant could have been issued. Now, post in January 21, government went to say they made it a much more prone to prosecution, prone to issue of warrants. They said even if there's a proceeding pending and you're crossing a threshold, you can be subject to issue of warrant and subject to prosecution and arrest. Now, when the government made this law, the intent was to check on fake invoices which are being circulating, and it became a menace to the society, a menace, and the heavy loss of revenue. The government, the right wisdom did it, but when the law was liberalized, it tended to be had a little bit of misuse part in there. So then the government came with the intention, issued a circular just a couple of months back there, basically. So they realized this is doing more damage. There's a loss of reputation to the business. You get acquitted at a later on is concerned. You lose reputation with your banks, with the society, with the supply chain, with your business partners. So there's a complete damage in the ecosystem of the business, and hence needs to be checked. So what they did, all small, frivolous, small monetary loss issues are there. They say we are decriminalizing them. And when they say we are decriminalizing, they say there's no need for them to go through the criminal process of arrest. So, and then increasing of the threshold was there. So government is the right wisdom. I can tell you it's the most laudable step government has taken it by decriminalizing it, and all the small offenses which tend to be misused, basically, will automatically move out of the prosecution proceedings.
Point well taken, Mr. Rakesh Nangia. I'll go to Advocate Rohan Shah. Mr. Shah, your name we read in the papers and otherwise because you represent disputes running into thousands of crores. So today the subject matter is not really of these big offenses or these claims that are made on companies. We are only concentrating on these small issues. But that's why I want to ask you. Is the court system getting clogged because of these small value cases, of 4, 5, 20 crore? And what do you think? How it will declog the courts? And why does it benefit society and businessmen at large if you make these offenses compoundable and arrest threshold raised from 5 to 20 crore? Your opinion on this issue?
So let's understand the dilemma which small and medium businesses have faced once GST has come in. Let's understand firstly that GST is an unprecedented law because the center and the state really both function and administer a common statute. This replaced a series of hitherto entrenched indirect taxes. So you had three major challenges. Firstly, you had an entirely new law. Second, this was a law very, very driven by the entire technological framework for GST, which, as we know, has been deficient on many, many fronts. And then you had the whole challenge, which was interpretational. Now, the issue is that when you talk of a criminal act, which ought to be prosecuted, along with all the consequences which come with that prosecution, we have to make this distinction between an issue which is a pure issue of interpretation or procedure and a evasion. And sadly, the officers who are administering the law at the fundamental level on the ground are not able to or are not desiring to make this distinction. So as a result, what you have is any infraction is a point for placing pressure. Because when the statute permits prosecution, pressure can be placed, and the pressure is placed in two ways. One, during the course of a search, assessees are made to pay a large amount of tax under protest. Now, under the law, this tax is not due at all unless and until a proper adjudication and appellate process has been followed. So firstly, you are in a situation where you have to pay, or your bank accounts are being frozen, your business is being brought to a standstill. And that is really not the purpose of a tax law. A tax law is not to disrupt your business. It is supposed to be a natural concomitant of the quantum of business that you do. So I think practically what we are finding is, interpretational issues are resulting in prosecutions. The advanced ruling authority, which should have played a guiding role in the context of interpretational issues, sadly is only staffed by officers of the tax department, contrary to what Supreme Court said in Roger Matthews and Madras Bar Association. As a result, all AARs, or I would say 99% of them, are negative. And you have this situation that during the course of a raid, people are being made to pay large amounts of money which they shouldn't pay, and refund of which is going to take 10 to 15 years. And this is caused at one level, as recently as in the May of 22, a CBIC circular to say that you can't make these recoveries pending a show cause notice and not in the course of a search. And I think this is now the logical extension of the larger movement across all laws to decriminalize certain types of infractions. And the fact that we are looking at not only decriminalizing, but the fact that we are also looking, to move it by a multiple of 4, from 5 crores to 20 crores, I think certainly would be of assistance. But at a practical level, I think you need 2 things to complement this. One, you need an unbiased advanced ruling authority so that interpretational issues can be sorted out in a fair manner. And second, even if somebody should have made a genuine mistake, you need a genuine mechanism either for settlement or compounding. And right now, both of these elements are missing. So while the step to go from 5 to 20 is really to be lauded and appreciated, I think unless you also bring in the mechanism on compounding and an effective advance ruling, I don't think the full impact of this will filter down to the small and medium size assessors.
Okay, thanks for sharing that viewpoint. I'll go to Mr. S. Ravina. One moot point was raised, sir, that under protest, businessmen are being made to pay. They're not being issued notice. They're first asked to pay, or there is a threat of arrest looming large when the officer comes visiting. So even though he has the option to go to court, he can't exercise that option because notice wouldn't be issued to him. How would we move ahead from this situation? And do you think that raising this threshold of arrest from 5 to 20 will go a long way in ensuring that at least the small and medium trader is not troubled because of these kind of so-called offenses?
So there are 2 aspects to it. One is the number, which has gone 4-fold, but it is also symbolic in many ways. That the first thing that we don't want to do is to arrest and harass people. Yes. And that's the symbol that has to be a symbolic thing, that this forthcoming, if it is approved, it will be a great step. Because there is always this fear. Any businessman you talk, anybody, they always fear that this is the worst that is going to happen to them. And the officers are using this. The working capital cycles are disrupted. And this is one way of telling all the business people to do business. We will take only the legitimate taxes. If there is a mistake, we'll resolve it. If there is an issue, we will resolve it. I think that should be the attitude. And I think this new step is going to be towards that direction.
Okay. Thanks for that input. I'll go to Rakesh, chairman from Nangia Anderson Private Limited. Businesses have been complaining about Section 83 of the GST Act. So this is allowing the authorities to provisionally attach properties and bank accounts for a period of up to 1 year. Now industry is saying, take a relook. My business completely goes, crushing to the ground when this happens. Do you see this also being relooked? Because this is what the GST Council is also going to deliberate upon.
I think this is the need of the hour. See, if you give a power, unfettered power, without any threshold, without any checks and balances, and you give freedom, it is likely in normal parlance to be misused. And that needs to be checked in at any cost. If there is an evasion, you have a full right to take action against SSC as a taxpayer. But do we really need to close his bank account? Do we really attach his asset like this and shut down the business by seizing his bank account? Answer, in normal course, no. Normal course, no. Until he's a perpetrator of such a massive doing an offense of fake invoice or something of that heavy threshold, then those could be the rare or the rarest cases where the business account should be attached and should not be the whole ecosystem of the business gets crushed if it is not ideal, it's the right timing. So I must need to add one more message for the people here. When you're raising a threshold, please remember the threshold is being raised for normal offenses, not filing a return, or not if you do anything which is taking a fake IC credit, issue of fake invoices. You don't get covered under this part of the law. You will be prosecuted without the threshold. So please be careful. All small offenses where earlier there was a prosecution, you will say you have a lot of relief coming on your way. But where there is a criminal, where there is a clear case of fake invoices and misuse of ITC, these are two laudable ones, or no payment taxes, then you will be prosecuted without the threshold.
Can you come on this again? Are you saying that this threshold from 5 to 20 crore will not be for claiming fake input tax credit?
So fake is a misuse, gross misuse. The threshold will not likely to be there, basically.
Not likely to be there. Okay, go to Advocate Rohan Shah. Do you also concur with what Mr. Rakesh Nangia said, that this would not include fake input credit issue, one? And secondly, also, if you could deliberate a little on the liberal use of the arrest provision under the GST Act, which you also deliberate in your last answer, how that could be relooked and which will be a relief for the government is already thinking on those lines. But do you see this passing muster eventually?
Yeah, so two things, right? I think criminal prosecution in a tax perspective has to be only initiated from two perspectives. One, in the case of fraud, and secondly, in the case of a fraud which has a certain sort of monetary impact. Now, why am I saying fraud? Because issues of procedure, issues of interpretation very clearly do not fall within the ambit of that which should be prosecuted. Secondly, why are we saying that it should be a fraud which has a certain impact? Because an issue which is a de minimis issue, let's say an issue, the monetary impact of which is very, very low, it is not even in the interest of the state to pursue those through a criminal prosecution, because the cost of that prosecution, even for the state, is just not worthwhile. So when you talk of a prosecution, what you're essentially saying is there must be a fraud which is manifest and it must have a certain impact. And that is the only situation in which you should move to say prosecution. And if we are moving from 5 to 20 crores, I would believe, and that is in fact endorsed and recommended by the council, I think that threshold is then a significant threshold. But we have to isolate it only to aspects of fraud, right? Now, coming to this whole input tax credit, it's important to understand that, there are two sets of people. There is somebody who effectively plans and enacts a fraud, right? But at the other end of this, there may be somebody who genuinely receives an invoice, maybe from someone who is enacting a fraud. This person pays the tax to this person issuing the invoice and expects in the normal course that this person will deposit the tax into the treasury, which is what they're supposed to do. Now, often what you find is that while they are not able to get the mastermind, they go to everyone who has got these invoices, including people who have fairly paid the tax and are taking credit only in consequence of tax paid and putting pressure on them because the central player has actually escaped. Now, luckily courts, and I must say to the great credit of the Bombay High Court and also the Delhi High Court, they are now asking the revenue as to how can you prosecute someone who has fairly received an invoice, received goods, made a payment of tax, but if somebody at the other end has omitted to pay the tax or created a fraud, how do you go chase these businesses which are themselves, in a way, a victim of fraud. So what you are seeing now, I think, is that the courts are bringing a certain more sensitive understanding to it. And I think we shouldn't wait for these issues to go to court. I think the learnings from the court really need to be translated into administrative actions. And the way to do that is, in certain industries where there was a likelihood of misuse of arrest provisions and seizure provisions, and there was a special law for a period for the gem and jewelry industry because of the nature of their goods, where you just have a higher threshold of engagement within the department before they decide to prosecute. So what happened in that case? That essentially you had a panel of 2 senior commissioners and a member of the board who had to get in, who had to look at an issue and say that, yes, we believe this should be prosecuted because it is a fraud which warrants and merits this sort of an action. And in that way, you take away the situation where the local range may, for tax collection purposes, want to put pressure. And the local commissioner signs off because he himself has pressure to collect revenue. So if you take the threshold higher and you create a higher bar with more senior officers involved in sanctioning this, I think that in itself will become a filter. And if you translate what courts are saying into the departmental manual of how you go about a raid and what you do in search and seizure, and when you actually prosecute or arrest, I think 80% of the cases would dissipate.
Thanks for that explanation on this issue. I'll go to Mr. Esrafi at this point. We are looking here at the government's intent. I think from the intention in the Ministry of Finance, the Joint Secretary and the other officers, the intent is to help the small businessmen. I would also like to recall that our Prime Minister Narendra Modi also said that his intent is to decriminalize. Of course, it was a message intended for an audience. It is not for any reason that you see messages emanating from the Finance Ministry that we are looking at such a thing. Do you think that we are moving towards that goal, that at least the GST simpler days are ahead from the kind of disputes that we see day in and day out now?
So the Finance Ministry gets feedback from various forums. And I think they know the ground reality that exists. And they are getting feedbacks which are not very conducive at this point of time for the business. And the mantra of ease of doing business is primary to this government. And I think these feedbacks are being implemented. And these steps that are being taken is one such step. Because what we feel is actually that generally the feedback, the time between the feedback and the implementation takes 6 to 8 months. And that is, the ministry has been continuously taking feedbacks. For example, there is this insurance industry feedback. Then there is a mutual fund industry feedback. So various industries are coming and giving their feedback of their own experiences. And I think even the small scale industry is well represented and they are getting feedbacks. Banks are giving feedbacks. And I think from this whole call of taking this to the next level of actually increasing the threshold, putting everything in the right, the fear of arrest, fear of prosecution, all this will be eradicated. I think this is a very welcome step, but it's all based on feedback. And this is a very new law in that sense. It's only five years plus. And I think we are all learning. And I think the ministry has recognized this fact and we are moving ahead with reforms.
2 quick comments before we close from Mr. Rakesh Tangia, followed by Mr. Rohan Shah.
I just want to add one thing. When the government is doing the whole hygiene of the whole process of prosecution, I think the prosecution and arrest should only be used in the rare of the rarest cases. I tell you the reason for that. If it is a procedural small offenses, a monetary deterrent is more important. You close a case, government gets the taxes, it becomes a deterrent of the taxpayer also. But it should not, and these powers, a threshold is very important, and it should not be generically applied. There should still be checks and balances in place so that every case should not jump into the prosecution, and which one intervention is very relevant and important to put some checks and balances between commissioner or committee before the cases of grievous is arising.
Point well taken, Mr. Rohan Shah. Your closing comment on the government's intent in helping the small business.
I think the intent as signaled by this and many other steps to decriminalize is very, very positive. And let me come from a slightly different perspective, right? I think we are a nation which needs a million jobs a month. And I think we are sort of providing close to 2 lakh. To make up the deficit, we are only going to need entrepreneurship at a wide scale, which means that people within and outside India must see India as a wonderful place to do business, an easy place to do business. If they are to invest their capital, their time, their energies here, so that we are able to create the jobs that we need to create. And I think as part of a larger culture to make India the destination where ease of doing business is at par with anywhere in the world, it's important that we have the correct culture in tax administration. And I think a bad story, whether it is of a MNC or an Indian business, ultimately is a bad story. And we need to eliminate bad stories so that we are a destination where people want to invest and create jobs, because quite honestly, that's then the win-win for everyone.
That's a good way to end the show. But I may also add, this is the first show in our series of shows before the GST Council meet. The second show, which is upcoming right after this week, would be on the GST Tribunal, which also is going to be discussed in the GST Council. We look forward to the GST Tribunal. It will help a lot of dispute settlement. That is a forum a lot of people are looking at. Also, my panel members are looking forward to. But that's on the next show. We have a lot of expectations from the upcoming GST Council meet. There is a resolution on the gaming industry also on the cards. We are all watching towards that also. But that we'll take up. That's it for now. But I would like to thank Mr. SLV, Mr. Rakesh Nangia, Mr. Rohan Shah for sparing time for such an important issue. And thank you, viewers, for tuning in. Thank you so very much.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.